You're saying that the probability of life in the universe is has to be considered regarding the elements which the universe generates, like hydrogen, helium, oxygen, and there is plenty of hydrogen and oxygen out there. So the probability of life
is the most abundant.
These are the most abundant elements
in the universe. I say of cosmic abundance, not solar system. The numbers, the order is from cosmic abundance, not solar system abundance. That is to say, we take into account that the solar system is a subsystem of the universe. Here we take the whole universe as a reference.
So when we see in the media that water has been found on Mars, you haven't been surprised at all. Makes you laughing.
Of course, you cannot find anything that water. This is a non-event. Did you say, we have found water on Mars? So what? It's the most abundant substance in the universe. This is not an event. It's just, of course, you cannot get anything else than water.
So there's plenty of oxygen, hydrogen, helium, and other elements out there. So the probability of life, how do you estimate the probability of life out there in the universe?
We don't estimate probability of life. This makes nonsense. I say water is life, and this information comes not from science, it comes from philosophy. You can take every civilization on Earth, they all put water at the basis of life. So as soon as water is the most abundant substance of the universe, life should be everywhere. Well, there is water, of course. And I would say liquid water, because if you are in ice or in the vapor, it's difficult to imagine life. You need temperature and pressure conditions that are coherent with the existence of liquid water.
Now, what is so specific about the quality and capacity of water?
I will say, before saying that it is to consider that a consequence of life is consciousness. And now comes the first question to ask. Is consciousness a consequence of life and water? Or is consciousness the explanation for life? Say, where you put consciousness? After?
Or before?
Or before. Because now you know that consciousness is important. And if you take the problem from the philosophical point of view, it's obvious, because every philosophy says that consciousness is before matter. You can take Chinese, Indians, and even Greek philosophy, philosophies where matter derives from consciousness. The idea that consciousness comes after matter is just specific of our scientific viewpoint of the universe. You say, if you go to a neuroscientist, he will say that you need neurons for making consciousness. If you have no neurons, no consciousness. And to have neurons, you need matter. So matter is here, consciousness is here. But now, the answer, could we put consciousness before matter? And here again, you can go to, the answer cannot lie into observation, it should go into theory. If you go from the theoretical point of view, you have basically two two theories. It is quantum physics and general relativity. General relativity, as far as I know, has nothing to say about consciousness. But quantum physics has to say something. And if you take the viewpoint of quantum physics, there is just one answer. Consciousness comes before matter, not after. And the people who are trying to put consciousness after matter as a consequence of the existence of water and matter, they are making just a mistake. Because, in fact, if you ignore quantum physics, you say if you are a biologist and you are not trained in quantum physics, you will reach these conclusions. But this conclusion comes from your ignorance of the existence of quantum physics. Now, if you take you put into the game, there is quantum physics, this position is no more acceptable. You should go the right way. Consciousness, water, matter, information, stored in water. Hence, derive concepts such as memory of water and things like this, which are at the very basis of what is consciousness and life. So, this is a critical point. Where do you put consciousness in your way of building the universe? The only logical way and the only compatible way with quantum physics is to say you have consciousness. First, then you have water. Consciousness put information into water, which is able to memorize information, because consciousness doesn't deal with water. Consciousness deals with information. So information, water, information consciousness, water, and then matter. That is to say, biological matter with carbon, nitrogen, and all the elements are consequences of the existence of consciousness.
Now, can you explain us a little bit more in detail what's for you the difference between consciousness and information?
Well, information is just the substance of the universe. You have to, quantum physics has the property of, well, I will take the other way. Before quantum physics, the vacuum was the vacuum. That is to say, vacuum would mean nothing. No matter, so vacuum. That was before quantum physics. When quantum physics was developed, and it had been formalized in 1930, 1 century ago, this shows you that we are in retardation. Our minds are in the 20th century and our body in the 21st. You say we need to adapt. So, quantum physics was saying, no, what we call vacuum is not the emptiness. Vacuum is a thing. It's a thing which creates matter. That's one of the consequences of quantum. If you take quantum physics, vacuum is a substance. And from this substance that we call vacuum, we get matter. And you can go to any kind of elementary physicist of the particles. Well, you know these big rings, like the CERN in Geneva. They create matter from vacuum every day. This is not a scoop. This is a consequence of quantum physics, and it has been experimentally verified. That vacuum, nothing visible, is able to create matter. And of course, if from nothing visible you can create matter. That means that visible is not the only attribute. You have also invisible things in the universe. And these invisible things, they have a name, these fields. See, nowadays we speak of fields, which are invisible entities, and matter derives from these invisible entities. So we go back to Plato. Plato was saying 3,000 years ago that what you see is just a shadow of the reality. Quantum physics has the same position. What you observe is a part of the reality. The real reality that is what you cannot observe. The observer is at the heart of quantum physics. And of course, when you put the observer has a consciousness. So you are obliged to put consciousness as the root of things. And this was the position of Max Planck, of Schrödinger, of Heisenberg, of Bohr. No, not Bohr. Bohr was not in this position. But Bohm, all the great father of quantum physics, have all arrived at the same conclusion. Consciousness first, matter second. This is not what we hear today in the media, or what we teach to students. What we teach to students who want to make medicine or biology is that you have matter first and consciousness second. This is not correct. If you put quantum physics in the play, consciousness comes before matter, not after.
It's a bit confusing because matter, matière, Heisenberg said la matière n'existe pas.
Yes, matter doesn't exist.
Matter doesn't exist. So what you mean by matter?
Because some things may exist by being invisible. So what you experiment is a thing called matter. But this thing has no existence by itself.
So it's a consequence. It's a concept. It's a concept. Okay.
Because you are confronted in permanence with a reality. And this reality, quantum physics is very clear, is not matter. This reality are vibrations. You are in permanent interaction with vibration, with fields. And when you want to speak about this confrontation between fields, you introduce a concept which is matter. But this concept was introduced well before we identify the fields. And it is just when we go to the fields that we say, okay, the fields interact each other. And there was a thing called matter before the field. And we say that the result of the interaction, we call it matter.
So we have.
But this matter has no existence by itself.
So we have to be careful the words we choose, otherwise we create confusion.
Critical to use the word. If we want to be right, we experiment fields.
Right. So this is
this experimentation.
The table here is a field.
Is a field. The table is a field. You are a field. The star is a field. Everything is a field. And when we say a field, that is to say something which is able to undergo vibration with a certain spectrum of frequencies. These are realities.
Well, let's precise this a little bit, because this table has a certain
it's
weight.
A state of a certain field.
Right, and it has a certain weight, so there's a certain mass.
Yeah, but mass is
that's something different.
Something different.
Right. So let's take two human beings. You have a baby.
We were speaking about matter, and matter has nothing to do with mass.
Right. It's two different things.
Two different things.
Right. And when we talk about matter, we talk about fields.
Yeah.
Just for the audience to explain, what is mass?
Mass is another concept which is not related to matter. Mass is related to vacuum, to space and time, what we call space-time today. With relativity, we have been obliged to merge time with space. So we speak of space-time and not of space and time. We have welded together the two terms to make space-time, that is to say, a 4D system, 4 dimension, not 3, plus 1, 4.
Yeah.
With the fourth one, which is welded to the three other ones. And mass is a property of space-time. It's not a property of matter, because matter is a property of fields. It's the way we speak of field without saying fields. We say matter. That you say we experiment things, forces.
Yeah.
We experiment, but this is not matter, this is field. If we want to be correct. Not correct, but if we want to use the right terms of what is our scientific knowledge now. It is a field, me, which experiment, and another field, which is a table. And for the layman, which is not aware of the existence of field, we call this matter. But this is just in your mind. This has no real existence. The reality is in the field. And the field is invisible. But when we interact with an invisible field, interact with another invisible field, you get visible things that we call matter. But we should not believe that because we see something, this thing is real. The reality is not what we see in the field. This is quantum physics. We know that we must think about invisible things from 1930. Mass doesn't relate to matter, mass relates to space-time. And when you take a certain amount of space-time, volume in space-time, and you want to accelerate or change the speed of this volume, then you need mass. To say this volume of space-time could be easily changed. We can easily change in speed. And if we say this volume of space-time, we can change its speed easily, we mean that we have a small mass. When we say this volume of space-time is very hard to change its speed, we will say that its mass is huge. But this is related to the volume of space-time, not to the matter.
Yeah.
Or if you prefer, in this volume of space-time, you have a certain amount of fields which are interacting, and what we call mass is the inertia of these fields which are inside. Because we can move space. Space is a substance. Space-time is a substance that's come from general relativity. Space-time is not empty, it's a substance, and we can change the shape of this substance. This is called gravitation. Or we can change the speed of a small amount of this substance, and we call this mass. But we don't need matter for that. We just need vacuum, space, and time. And this was a big shock when Ernest Rutherford made his first experiment. At the end of the 19th century, people were convinced that matter was made of atoms. It was a very fruitful idea. And when Rutherford wanted to understand what was an atom, he just sent helium particles on a gold plate. Gold plate is dense, it's massive. And he sees that most of the particles came across this dense matter as if there were nothing, which means that matter is vacuum, in fact. Matter is vacuum. And this phenomenon, this idea that matter is vacuum, that is to say, fields, has given birth to a science which is called quantum physics. It was the experiment of Rutherford that have motivated the development of quantum physics. To understand how something which is invisible, we call a field, could be considered as matter. But again, matter and mass are two concepts which are quite different.
But is the mass just a theoretical concept?
No. Mass is not a theoretical concept. It's the way fields speak. When you want to change the speed of a certain amount of space-time, you have to define what is called mass. Because you have certain regions of space-time which are easily accelerated, what we call small mass, and we have other regions which are very hard to accelerate, we call large masses. But the two are fields. But they are towards a movement. When you want to make movement, you need mass to say that there are some fields which are easily to change the speed, other ones that are much more difficult. That's all.
So the question of mass and matter then are two very different ones, and the definitions are very, very different. But to come to another subcategory of, or to come to a specific category of mass is the question of biomass. Yeah. When you have biomass, we can talk about something different than mass.
When we speak about biomass, we take another way of considering matter, not mass. This is why science is not logic, because we call biomass something which is not mass, which has nothing to do with matter.
Right.
But what we mean by biomass is the number of cells. You say you take a living system, you count 1, 2, 3, 4. I say we take 10 to the power 14 cells. I am speaking of a human being. And I call this biomass. But it is not mass. It is the sum of all the particles, the cells, that constitute a human being. Each cell being a certain volume of space-time, which contains a certain amount of matter, which is a number of particles, of atoms. The number of atoms being function of the number of quarks. So, the notion of matter has always in relation with the number of particles, of cells. Knowing that if you go at the fundamental level, what is a particle? It is a consequence of two fields which are interacting. This is called quantum physics. When you are in quantum physics, when two fields want to interact, they create particles, which are the mediator of the interaction. We are particles. And when we say we want to, for instance, you take two magnets and you put two the same poles, you see a repulsion. Mm-hmm. And when you are in quantum physics, you say that you emit photons, you create photons, which are particles, which explain why there is repulsion or attractions. In the similar way, when two quarks meet, they create matter of particles. It's called protons, neutrons, not electrons, because electrons are not made of quarks. It's another field, because we have the field of quark, we have the field of leptons, which creates the electrons. The field of quark creates protons and neutrons. And when a quark field interact with a lepton field, it creates an atoms that we call matter, but at the very basis, it's a creation of the field. And the fact that this system has a mass is completely decorrelated from the problem of what is matter. This has a mass because after we want to change the speed of the system. And as soon as you want to change the speed, then comes the mass.
Yeah. So in a way, to have more clarity in science, we need to put order.
Yeah.
And be
not to put order. We need first to use the right terms.
Right.
And then after, not order, because order, again, a hierarchy. It's not the same. Hierarchy, it's okay from the English?
Yes, hierarchy, yeah.
No, because I don't know how to pronounce the words. Yeah. Hierarchy in French. A hierarchy is not order. It's the source of order.
So the hierarchy would be consciousness?
Yeah. This is hierarchy.
Information.
First consciousness. Then information. Consciousness acts on information.
Yes.
Which is still immaterial. Information is not matter. Then information goes into a matter field that we call water. And then from this water field, which we call matter, we get life. See? This is a hierarchical. This is not an order.
Yeah, I see. Now that would mean that very simple organisms like a bacteria has a certain level of consciousness.
Yeah, but if you take the amount of consciousness as a variable, it is clear that the bacteria has a very small amount of consciousness.
Well, that would mean for the human body that the generation of consciousness is not just in the brain, but everywhere we have water.
Yeah.
That means the muscles, the liver.
Yeah, and you should be aware about the amount, because consciousness is additive. It's an additive properties, like entropy. That is to say, when you say a bacteria has a very small level of consciousness, okay. But no, if I take 10 to the power 13 bacteria, each bacteria has a small amount of consciousness. But 10 to the power 13, this makes a big amount of consciousness. And we have a word for this. This word was coined by Carl Gustav Jung. It is inconscient collectif. So I don't know the English word.
The collective unconsciousness.
Collective unconsciousness is the sum of all this very small amount of consciousness which add together and which are in a so large amount that we get a consciousness which is quite high relative to the consciousness we are stored in the water of our cell of the body. Or if you prefer, we are made of two consciousness. The consciousness we come from our cells, their water content, which we call personal consciousness, I. And we have the collective unconsciousness. We come from the bowels, which is about the same order of magnitude than our own. We are conscious and unconscious, and both, this is both consciousness, take their sources from the universal consciousness of the universe, which impregnate everything.
How would you then see the level of consciousness of a virus? Because you have some water molecules in a virus.
A virus has no level of consciousness because he has no metabolism.
So there's an important ingredient that everything that is conscious, whatever level it is, needs to have a metabolism.
Yeah, of course.
Which is not the case with the virus.
It's not the case with the virus.
But a bacteria has it in
the
human
trouble
being.
with the virus that there are theories that say that viruses do not exist. They are waste. It's always the same problem when you go to a crime scene. You only see the result of the crime.
Yeah.
What they call indice. I don't know the English word. And this, and materials, we show you that the, what? Evidence, yeah, it could be that way. While Sherlock Holmes say, well, he has a shoe which is black with a hole, and that, you see, because he sees something and he deduces, and this kind of thinking, we are making this every time. We have evidences, and we try to rebuild stories which explain why we have these evidences. But for the same evidence, lot of evidences, we have plentiful explanations. And our trouble is to know which is the right one, the most reasonable one. And it is here that we have consciousness. That is to say, consciousness gives you the ability, among all the possible interpretation of evidences, what will be the most significant. This is the role of consciousness, to take information and create meaning. Because information, when you take it, it has no meaning. It is only consciousness will give meaning to information. And this is why you should put consciousness at the very beginning of the thing and not at the end. But I'm not sure that was a question at the beginning.
Well, the question is, if a virus has no metabolism, what's the link between why do we need metabolism to become conscious?
Because we go again to the paper, which is Thermodynamics of Life.
I have an answer for myself, but I want you to explain it to the audience in a professional way.
Because if you want to now to go into the technical details, when you say there is water in formation, there is life, okay. But now, how does it work? And here comes the metabolism. Because we have a science which is called thermodynamics of irreversible processes, which tells that there are two kinds of processes in the universe. Process that can be reversed. Say, I go in this way, and then I can go back at the initial state. These are called reversible processes. And we have processes which are irreversible. That is to say, when I go to another state, I cannot go back to the state, to the same state where I came from the first time. This is called irreversibility. And we have a science which is thermodynamics of irreversible processes, not of equilibrium reversible, but irreversible processes, which was created in the mid of the 20th century, which was a Belgian scientist whose name was Ilya Prigogine. He makes this science. And this is where we meet entropy, because when you want to explain how a system can go from elementary particles associate into complex structures, make structures, this man shows that you need an entropy flux. You take a system of materials particles and you want them to organize into a structure, you need a huge entropy flux. Entropy flux means that you have to create entropy in time to feed this complexity, because if you stop the flux, the complexity disappears. The complexity we see is a consequence of this flux of entropy. And how do you create entropy in a huge amount? Is through a metabolism. The role of metabolism is to create an entropy flux which will organize matter, which will make structures. And this is very clear from this science which calls thermodynamics of irreversible processes from Ilya Prigogine. And this is the very basis of what we call life. The ability to create entropy, to make structures. And when you have structure, you have function. And when you have function, you have life. But the key point, and we all know that, this is why we have to drink. This is why we have to take food. Because if we don't take drink or don't take food, the entropy flux diminishes and we lose our structure. Our structure are not static structure, they are dynamic ones. It's the same when you put water in a pan on the fire. If there is no fire, there is no structure in water. But as soon as there is fire under the pan, you will see water which creates structure. This is called Bénard cells. Instead of having an homogeneous medium, you will get an heterogeneity which appears. Some water molecule will make some structure which have different velocities and temperature from other ones. This is structure, a very simple structure, but this is very basic because you have the fire. If you stop the fire, the structure disappears. And we are the same, that is to say, as soon as you eat and drink, you can have this metabolic activity, you create entropy, and this creation of entropy gives structure, dynamic structure. When you stop eating and drinking, this dynamical structure disappears. We call this death. And it is not very complicated to understand.
Can you explain the link between... No, you were talking about dynamic structure and entropy. Now let's add quantum physics and consciousness to this.
When you say that quantum physics puts consciousness first, fields second, what we call matter, you want to speak about what is life, not at the material level, but at the upper level where you have no fields. Or just quantum field, which are what is the universal field which exists everywhere, which is a vacuum. It's the only field which is always there. You can disintegrate a matter field. You can take a proton and you can annihilate the proton. It will disappear into the vacuum. But there is one thing that you cannot annihilate, it's the vacuum itself. The vacuum is the vacuum, it's the source of all reality. You cannot kill the vacuum, not possible. So, from this, when you are at this ultimate reality, you are just made of information, not from fields. And so, if we want to speak of life at this level, but at this level, it is not material life. It's spiritual life. You, as an entity which exists beyond matter. Matter being just at a certain amount of space and time, given space and time, you are living. But you are not obliged when you undergo death, that is to say, you stop eating and drinking, so your matter structure disappears, you are still there as a conscious being, which is not visible, which is not material, but which exists in the quantum vacuum. Or, as I don't like the word vacuum because it's always reminding of nothing, I prefer ether. The term ether, which was introduced by the Greek philosopher, or which is available in Indian philosophy as Akasha. Chinese call this Tao, the mind, this kind of reality which is at the very basis of life and consciousness, and whose substance is information.
So let's give this a little bit of a medical perspective. So we, as a human being, we are generating a dynamic structure due to a
we are crossed by a flux of entropy.
Right.
It is this flux of entropy which allows us to live.
Due to a metabolism.
Yeah. And not only us, for instance, the Earth can be, this is what is called the Gaia hypothesis. Mm-hmm. The Earth is a living entity. The Sun is a living entity. Why? Because the Sun is pouring on the Earth a flux of entropy. We call this a flux of energy, but in fact, this is a flux of entropy, not a flux of energy. And from this flux of energy which is crossing the Earth, we get the biosphere. Right. Bacteria, plants, animals, and humans. Yeah. But we are the consequences of this flux. If the Sun disappears, there would be no more life. And at our level, we benefit from the flux from the Sun to be ourselves, but we can be ourselves through a metabolism. We create our own entropy. And here comes the, well, I will say the golden rule of entropy that everybody should know. We are doomed to be crossed by entropy. But to be crossed by entropy doesn't mean to store entropy. Did you say we receive entropy? And we have to create more entropy than we receive to get the structures. If we create more entropy than we receive, we can get structures, dynamic structure that we call bodies. And this is always like this. More entropy flux means more structure. And this means that when you say that the entropy crosses you, that means that you cannot store it. Not only you should be able to let the entropy flow, but as you create your own flux, this flux should also be outside. Because if you keep entropy inside, the overflow diminish. And if the overflow diminishes, you lose your structure. And this is called illness. That is to say, in this way of thinking, it is at this point we encounter medicine. That is to say, if we are not able to manage correctly this entropy flux, we will get ill. And we need a doctor to identify where is the trouble.
So I try to summarize again what you say, and then let's try to give it a little bit more of a medical perspective. The flux of entropy is the result of a metabolism.
And what comes from the Sun.
And light.
Because the Sun, if there was no Sun, there will be no life on Earth. So we need...
So that's where we are embedded in a bigger
context. Because our
context.
metabolism is dependent on food.
Yeah.
And food comes from the Sun.
Yeah. Well, I see that. So the entropy flux, to make it short, is associated to a certain state of consciousness.
I will not say that. But because consciousness is above this.
Well, let's distinguish. There is an individual state. There is an individual state of consciousness where you are right now.
No. You make a confusion between 2 points. We are speaking at the level of medicine and the body. What we are speaking here is the body, not the mind.
Yeah.
That is to say, we have also flux of information. And this flux of information, again, we have to be cross and not to store information. But this is another aspect of the human being. Beside the body, we have a mind.
Well, then would it be more precise for you to say that the entropy flux is associated to a certain emotional, physical, and mental well-being?
Yeah. So consciousness is more related to what happened in the mind than in the body. But you know, this is one of the big problems of philosophy from the very beginning of philosophy about 3,000 years ago. We are made of a mind, of a body, and what is the relationship between mind and body?
Yeah.
Is it body which creates the mind? Is it possible to change the body by changing the mind?
Yeah.
What we learn from modern physics, quantum and relativistic physics, is that consciousness acts on information, and information, when goes into water, interacts with metabolism. So the state of wellness of a human being is dependent on what happens in his mind and his body. In the body, it's the metabolism which creates entropic flux, which will have a reverse effect on the mind. But the mind, being above information, being above the matter, create another contribution. We can be opposite or in the same direction as the flux of matter, of entropy coming from matter. So it's a problem with two heads. And what we have, what we see from medicine is that it considers that it is a one-head problem. Matter, what it comes in, and if I am able to, you can stay at this level. You can stay at this level, it's perfectly correct. And you will get what we call modern medicine with drugs. It works. But is it the best way of healing people? Surely not. Because when you have a problem, you give drugs. You don't solve. You solve you can unblock the points where the entropy flux is blocked. You can unblock these points, but it can be blocked again in the mind, and this will not be the drug which will remove this. For deblocking the mind, you need meditation, music, things which are quite different from just eating and drinking.
I come to a different conclusion from clinical observation that physical, emotional, mental well-being is the result of entropy flux due to the underlying metabolism.
Yeah, this is one way, but you have the other way.
And that
is to say, if you are clear in your mind, you can heal your body. Just an example from history. There was a time where there was a terrible disease which was called leprosis, I think is the right term. Yeah. Leprosis, la lèpre. And leprosis is clearly a very contagious disease. When you are on the matter side, they say that you have, I think it's a bacteria which is responsible.
Mycobacteria.
Yeah. So you emit this bacteria, and if you are in contact with somebody which is ill, you become ill. It's called contamination. And when you are in this state of mind, that as soon as you receive the bacteria, you will get ill, you get a problem. Because there were, at that time, it was, I think, mainly women, which were religious women, which were in charge of, comment on dit les lépreux? The English word for lépreux?
Leprosy patients.
Bon. Which was in charge of the ill people, and they were not ill.
Yeah.
They were wearing no mask, they were just in contact, and nothing happens. Because in their head, there was linked with what they call God, something which is completely not material. And this information in their head prevents them to be affected by the bacteria. That proves that it goes in one way and the other way.
Yeah.
And you can heal by changing the flux of matter, entropy, or you can heal by moving to flux of information, which is also entropy, but not with the same name. We just have the Boltzmann constant in different. You say in the body, the entropy is in joule per Kelvin. In the mind, the entropy is in bits, which is the amount of information or bandwidth. So you don't have the same word, but in fact, this is the same principle. And this is really important to understand that we can, when we are making medicine, we can heal disease either with entropy or with information. This is not the orthodox viewpoint. This is a viewpoint that comes from the taking into account the quantum physics. If you say quantum physics exists and it is a good science, you automatically have to admit that you can heal both ways, either from matter or from information. When you work with matter, you work with the body, with chemical substance. When you work with the mind, you work with information. But both are okay, because there is a link between mind and body. These are not separate entities. And the link is the entropy concept, viewed as the amount of energy per degree Kelvin in the body, or at the number of bits as an information. But basically, it's the same equation for the entropy flux. And so there is a...
When you talk about information entropy, you refer to Shannon.
Shannon, yeah. The demonstration in 1948 that in communication, when you want to communicate a message, the amount of information is the same as entropy. The difference is just a universal constant, because the amount of information is measured in bits, which has no units, and the physical entropy is measured in joule per Kelvin, so you have a constant which makes the link between the information and the entropy. But this is a universal constant, so it doesn't change, it's always the same. So it's just a mean of saying, I am in the body or I am in the mind.
And this can also be applied when it's about accessing the information prior to neural activity.
Yes, because if you take consciousness, quantum physics, you say that consciousness is at the source of our reality. And consciousness doesn't act on matter, consciousness acts on information. This is the substance of consciousness, is information. You have information, and consciousness is, the role of consciousness is to give a meaning to this information. Because information by itself can have any meaning. It's only through consciousness that you get a meaning, and once you get a meaning, you can get a neuronal activity.
So let's take a clinical example. When you have got a person who has got 40 degrees fever, and he has malaria, for instance, and you have very strong mental activity and the person starts hallucinating and sees things.
In fact, you will have both. Because that I constate when I have fever. Of course, I see that my body is working, is making things, but in my head, it's not quite. When you have fever, you are also big movement in the head of ideas of something.
Exactly. That's what
you cannot have fever and a quiet mind. I never experienced this state.
They can be very different. People can have all sorts of states, but it's an individual entropy flux. It's individual. It's a different one in your case, a different one in my case.
And what I know is that you can have the mind completely upset, and the body quiet. But this is called fullness.
Yeah. But this
exists.
This would be also an individual entropy flux. But let's take the fever, because there you have heat.
Yeah.
And you evacuate heat.
Is a clear link to entropy, because entropy was introduced in thermodynamics to explain what is heat.
Yeah.
Heat is a flux of entropy directed from the inside to the outside.
Yeah. Now, could it be that those who have 40 degrees fever and are sweating and have a very high mental activity and they see things the other people do not see, they see this because the state of consciousness changes due to the entropy flux?
This is more complex than this.
When I talk about consciousness, I talk about the individual state of consciousness.
This is an effect of temperature. We have a problem with consciousness because the universal consciousness doesn't depend on temperature. It is. And whether you are at such temperature, higher or lower, it doesn't mind. But when you speak about the local consciousness, that is to say, you have membranes. In your cells, they are made of membranes. And on this membrane, you have water. And the universal consciousness put information into on these membranes. This is the way we have a link between matter and mind, body and mind. Here we have the problem of temperature. Because when you increase the temperature, the information which is stored in the water on the membrane becomes unstable, because there is movement and you can change the information at the level of coherence domain. So when you increase the temperature, you will obviously have a disorganization of mental processes.
Due to a reduction of coherent domains or an increase?
Usually, increase in temperature is always reduction. Loss of coherence. You say the higher the temperature, the more difficult it is to remain coherent. And what we call local consciousness, I, when you say I, this is local consciousness, and this is coherence.
Yeah.
You can lose this coherence just by an increase of temperature. This is not the only way. There are other ways that is well known in medicine, which is anesthetics. You know, anesthetics, it's very simple. It's just a small molecule, a gas. You breathe the gas and you lose consciousness. Because you put, the membranes are completely upset by this gas. You change the water, the information which is stored in water is temporarily lost, so you lose consciousness. So this is the trouble with the local consciousness. It can be dependent on what you breathe and what is the temperature and so on. So what we know from fever is that the higher the fever, the less the smaller is the coherence on your membranes. So you lose your I. You don't lose yourself. yourself, which is in the universe and which is a cloud of information around your body. This you don't lose, but you lose the connection.
Yeah, yeah. Now, does that optimize entropy flux?
It is not optimization, it's just perturbation. Because you have the flux of entropy which are horizontal, and you have the flux of entropy that are vertical. You affect the vertical flux.
My observation is that fever has a very, very important healing effect.
Yeah, of course, it is the most universal way of healing, to increase the temperature. Because when you have a disease, you can say that this disease is memorized somewhere in your body through the membrane, these information. So by increasing the temperature, you disorganize this information, and when the fever goes down, you have new information.
Yes.
And so you have no more disease.
Yes.
So the fever is important in this respect.
To reorganize, basically.
Reorganize the information on your membrane, which is responsible for your illness.
Yeah.
And it can disappear by increasing the temperature. The only problem is that you don't have to go too high, typically 42 Celsius, because otherwise the disorganization is too strong. And then you don't go back to a viable state. And so this is death. And the other way is that if you take drugs for avoiding
lowering fever,
this is catastrophic, because you cut down this way of healing. You are to become dependent on the drug.
In my understanding, the loss of coherence is an essential part to reorganize.
It's more than this. Coherence is the only important thing in the universe. I don't say order. I say coherence. It's not the same. And coherence is not the same than structures. Coherence is above structure, is above. For instance, if you speak of coherence in space, you get structures. But if you have coherence in time, you get functions.
Mm-hmm.
So structure and function, which are two different things, can be merged into the coherence concept, which can be expressed in space or time to give structure or function. So that does mean that coherence is more important than structure and function. And when we go to quantum physics, we have two kinds of quantum physics. The quantum physics of individual particles, where it is in fact a physics of incoherent states. This is another definition of particular the quantum physics we use for making phones and internet and what we learn in school. It's incoherent particle physics. And we have another kind of quantum physics, which is the physics of coherent quantum states, which here the physics that explain how you are when you take electromagnetic field from the vacuum and put them into water, you get coherence domains, which are the support of informations, as soon as this water is supported by something, a membrane for a body, or a nanobubble of gas for liquids. So you see that the key word is coherence. And we have another very good example of the importance of coherence. When you want to take one proton and take another proton, to fuse these two protons to make an helium nucleus. That's what happened in the sun. Two protons fuse to make helium. In the sun, it is an incoherent process. That is to say, for this reaction to happen, because the two protons are the same charge, the more you approach them, the more difficult is to keep them together because they repel each other because they have the same electrical charge. And you need to have a very huge energy for crossing this energetical barrier to go sufficiently close so now the nuclear force operates and you have the fusions. And this is why it's so difficult to recreate what happened in the sun on Earth. They call this a tokamak, or fusion of hydrogen. It is a project to make energy by fusing hydrogen into helium. But it's very difficult to perform because we are working with incoherent states. What we learned from quantum physics is that if we were able to have a coherent proton which is in the same state as the other one, there will be no more repulsion. Mm-hmm. So the fusion will be immediate. And this can be happen in a body. At room temperature and normal pressure. You don't need the condition of the sun. Because you act with two coherent states. That is to say, when you have it with coherent states, things which are impossible with incoherent state becomes possible. And I know this from a Russian guy which was in charge of a Russian scientist. He was in charge of observing what happened in Chernobyl because after the Chernobyl accident, there was a perimeter of security, nobody was allowed to enter, and scientists have the authorization to enter to see, make measurement, to see what happened to the plants, to the animals. And this man was very surprised because Chernobyl was, in our mind, should be a desert with no life. Because of the radioactivity. And what he has observed is that Chernobyl was a very wonderful world in terms of life. No illness, nothing. Of course there was radioactivity. The machine was but there was no consequences on biological life. And he has to, for explaining this fact, he has devised a theory of coherent state of the nucleus, which allows to perform nuclear reaction at room temperature and ambient pressure. In a body. Because what we see is that it's biological matter which is not ill. That means that biological matter is able to create coherent states, and if you are able to create coherent state, you will remove the radioactivity in your body, even if you live in an environment which is highly radioactive. So you see, it goes very far, because that means that we don't have to fear about radioactive pollutions. Because in our body, if we are able to manipulate coherent states, this will not be a problem. The problem is that most people ignore the physics of coherence. Mm-hmm. And if you ignore the physics of coherence and you think always into incoherent states, then radioactivity is a problem.
But still, the entropy flux is always the condition to stay in good health. Even if you have
first,
the result,
the entropy flux should be the highest possible. And second, you have to avoid stagnation of entropy. This will say, at no place there should be a stop of the flux. Even if the entropy is flowing right in other place of your body, if at some place the entropy evacuation is blocked, you will get an illness at this level. And of course, as the body is interconnected, the interconnection, the entropy flux which is flowing, the entropy which is flowing not at that point, it could be not sufficient to restore the equilibrium where the entropy is blocked.
Now let's take an example. If you have got a patient with cancer and he has a metastase in the lungs, and we have a clearly identified solid structure, and somebody goes through a real healing process, this structure going to disappear at some point, and entropy flux has been triggered somehow.
Yeah, but we are working on this subject with a friend which is called Laurent Schwartz, which is a specialist in cancer. So we have now a very simple theory of cancer, in fact. What is cancer? It's a cell which has two ways of creating entropy. The first way is the most primitive one, is called fermentation. That is to say, you take glucose, which is a sugar, and you cut glucose into two lactic acid molecules, and then you get the entropy flux that you need to live. It's not a very large entropy flux, but it allows you to develop and to reproduce. The only thing that this way of living does not allow is to stop growing. That is to say, when you are in a fermentation process, two cells will become 4, 8, and there is no way of stopping proliferation. And this is, of course, cancer. To say cancer is a cell which has undergone into this way of managing its entropy flux with fermentation, and the consequence is that it cannot regulate its growth. So it will thrive. All the entropy flux will come from the cancer cell for producing more and more and more, and at the end, you will get cancer on one end and a dead body because all the resources have gone to the cancer cell. This is the first primitive way of creating entropy. The other second way, which has been created by evolution, is respiration. That is to say, instead of cutting glucose into two molecules of lactic acids, you use oxygen. And with oxygen, you burn glucose to make carbon dioxide and water. And this is much more efficient in terms of entropy flux. You get a huge flux, much more important than with fermentation. The consequence is that you get much more complex structures with respiration than with fermentation. And that's why when you are in fermentation, you get bacterial activity. And when you are with respiration, you can have human beings, things which are very complex. But this mechanism has an advantage, is that it allows you either to grow, multiply, and then to stop growing. And one day you say, no, I have enough cells for what I want to do, so now I will stop. And when you are in a respiration way of life, you can either grow or not grow. You have the choice. And this will be under genetic regulation. That is to say, when you are young, a baby, you need to grow. But when you are an adult, you just slow down the genes for growing, and now you get stop. And this is because you are under oxygen metabolism, respiration. And this is our interpretation of cancer. What is cancer is a cell which, even with oxygen, refuses to get oxygen. She goes to fermentation. She prefers the primitive old way. That is to say, it prefers a smaller entropy flux rather than a larger one. And now, of course, we have identified the key point where glucose is burned for making carbon dioxide and water. It's in the mitochondria. This is the point when oxygens come to what is called complex 4 of the electron transfer chain, complex 4. And what makes complex 4? It takes 4 protons, 4 electrons, 1 oxygen molecule, and you make water. If this process is okay, you get normal cells. If this process, for one reason or another one, doesn't occur, you have accumulation of electrons because they're no more combined with protons and oxygen. You have no more water, and then you go to fermentation. Yeah. And this is cancer. So this we have checked with people who have cancer and metastasis, and we give them some chemicals which are known for restoring the mitochondrial activity. And even if there are metastases, these metastases disappear, the tumor disappears, and we get normal cells. The only trouble with this approach, it works for making disappear what we see as a tumor. It disappears. But we doesn't act at the information level. We just make the tumor disappear, the consequence. But the reason, which is somewhere in the interstitium or in the cells, in the water, has not disappeared. That is to say, as soon as you stop the treatment, the tumor reappears and the metastasis also. So we know that we can deal with this, with cancer. We know the cause. We know that the tumor is just a revelator of a state, and we can make it appear or disappear, but we still don't know the cause. And for this, I think that we have to work at the water level, the information level. It is at this level that we can heal, and here it's not chemical drugs that will be useful, but we can go to more information remedies such as informed water or meditation or mindfulness. You have to go with information to...
So this means with this kind of approach to treat cancer, you enhance entropy flux as long as you give the drug?
Yeah.
But it's actually an incomplete entropy flux because as soon as you stop it...
This is very easy from the mitochondrial activity. When a mitochondria is working, you have a large yeast effect, a large release of entropy in form of yeast. As soon as you have fermentation, this large amount of liberation of entropy is no more possible. So you go to a stage where the entropy release is much smaller. And so as the entropy is much smaller, but you are still a complex body, instead of producing yeast, which is a good thing, you produce biomass, cells. Yeah. And these cells give rise to tumors. Yeah. So cancer is a disease of entropy. For me, it's clear. It's not a problem of genetics. It's not a problem of all the theory we see in cancer literature. Because if cancer was a genetic origin, You know, we have now CRISPR-Cas9 tools. With CRISPR-Cas9 tools, we are making we can cut DNA anywhere, put another kind of DNA. This is called immunogenotherapy. We can cut very nicely, and we should heal cancer. And what we have seen from the tools, the genetic tools, CRISPR-Cas9 are available for now 20 years, and they have not been able to heal, to cure cancer. Cancer is still there. Yeah. So that clearly means that cancer is not a problem of the gene. It's a problem of the metabolism which goes on the right or the wrong track. Fermentation, and not on the right one, respiration. So when you take the problem on this side, we get remedies, but it's just remedies for symptoms, tumors. It's not remedy for healing. So that means that research should continue to. But here, as I told, this research cannot be oriented with drugs. It should be oriented with water and information. Maybe homeopathy could be a good solution, or what we call informed water, because we know that we can put into water information for healing, because the consciousness interacts with water and can put an healing information into water. And when you give this water to somebody which is in a state of illness, this information could solve many problems. We don't claim that every kind of disease could be healed this way, but some diseases which are clearly information disease or water-related disease should be treated in this way.